What is your view of having women being assistant worship leaders under the leadership of the male worship leader? And then Bernie, which I'm tagging onto this question on YouTube, asks, can women run a church and be the head pastor?
Okay, with a assistant women worship leaders, oh gosh, I didn't know this was coming. In the book of, let's see, is it Second Chronicles? I'm gonna have to look this up.
What's the verse?
You know what? It's a verse about the sons of the high priest oh, here, I found it. Okay. This is in First Chronicles chapter 25, and it says, in verse 5, all these were the sons of Heman, the king's seer, in the words of God, to exalt his horn, for God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. All these were under the direction of their father for the music in the house of the Lord, with cymbals, stringed instruments, and harps for the service of the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the authority of the king. And so in that passage, it talks about the 3 daughters of Heman were involved in leading worship in the temple. And so, yeah, sure. You know, it's like that's something that, and even if I didn't have that verse, I would go, yeah, sure, because it's not something that the Bible doesn't permit. It's not something that's violating a scriptural passage. And so I have ladies who lead worship at my church, and you know, they are under the leadership of the head worship pastor. But you know, he's not there hovering over them while they're leading worship, you know. And so we've had ladies who've come in and led worship. Usually it ends up being on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights, that kind of thing. And so yes, you know, absolutely. And I think that's a scriptural thing. As far as women running a church, that's something that, okay, this is in 1 Timothy chapter 2. And let me change some things for you. Is it okay for the women to run the home in a married situation? What do you think?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Run the home and, okay, I need more, I need a better...
Is it okay for the woman to be in charge of everybody in the home?
No.
Why?
Because she's under the authority of the marriage relationship.
Right. And so, you know, in Ephesians chapter 5, it gives the roles of the husband and the wife, and it says the wife is to be like the church, and she's to be in submission to the husband, who's to be like Jesus. And so, you know, just to make this thing short, if the husband's acting like Jesus, it's a pretty easy thing to submit to him. When a wife is running the home and running her husband, the order is out of whack. When that's happening, what you have is Genesis chapter 3, where Eve told Adam to eat the apple. And it's specifically why God flipped that whole thing around. He said, I don't want this going on because of what's happened here. Now, what's going to be taking place is the husband is going to be in the leadership authority because he wasn't, and in the leadership position because he wasn't, and the wife is to be submissive in the situation. And so not only is it a picture of Christ in the church, it's a picture of the results of the fall. Okay? And so having that background, you go to 1 Timothy chapter 2, and it talks about the men in worship. And in verse 8, it says, I desire therefore that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting, because men have problems with wrath and doubting and prayer. And then he goes on in verse 9, and he says, in like manner also, that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, because if you've ever looked at TikTok, you know what happens here, right? That the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Let a woman learn in silence or stillness with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. That word teach in the passage is in the present infinitive, and it means to teach, to continue to teach. It means to be a teacher in the passage. So he's saying, I do not permit a woman to be a teacher or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. And then he gives the reasons. And the reasons are not because women are dumb, or because men are smart, or because women are emotional, or because men are logical. It's not any of that nonsense. It's not because women are weaker and men can bench more. It's not for that reason. These are the reasons. And he says, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. And so it's a picture of the creation, first off. And then secondly, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she'll be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. And so the reason that women are not to be in charge in the church is because the church is something that pictures things that God has done and that God is doing. And the first thing it pictures is the fact that there is a creator and he's made an order. And so that's the reason that Paul gave. Adam was formed first and Eve, therefore the guy up front is going to be a man. And secondly, Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And that's the fall. And so it's creation and the fall, and it's something that we're witnessing of when we're doing church. The guy up front is there because of creation and the fall. The fact that there's a creator and he made us, and that the man and the woman fell. And the reason that, again, we fell into the sin that we fell into is because the man submitted to the woman. And what God's doing is flipping that whole thing around. And so it's not because he's the greatest guy on the planet. It's because God has set this up as kind of a life picture. And so, again, it's not to be violated. So there are all kinds of things that you see women doing in Scripture. Women are called deaconesses in Scripture. In fact, in this passage, I believe when it says, verse 11, likewise their wives, that's not what it says in Greek. It says likewise likewise gune, which is a word that either means wife or women. And so it can be translated likewise the women, and most likely that's the translation that should be there. And so there were women deaconesses. Phoebe, for example, was a deaconess. But when you're talking about elders, when you're talking about teaching elders, that was not something that was open to a woman in the first century. And God hasn't changed his mind on this whole thing, again, because of creation and the fall. And but again, when we're looking at how ministry goes, I have an executive secretary, and that lady runs me. She's involved in lots of decisions around here. I ask her opinion, that kind of stuff. She keeps me squared away in a number of areas. I've got other secretaries that do exactly the same thing. My wife, I said before, is the principal at the school here. We have all kinds of teachers here that are women. We have teachers in Sunday school that are women. And again, it's just a situation between men and women that God has defined it this way. And so, short answer, no.